That was just really, really wonderful and perfect for our kickoff with our new prosperity series called Prosperity and You. And so really take in the beautiful words of that song. I like living a blessed life. I like living a blessed life where I can move mountains and the mountains move, where I hold a vision, a dream, and the dream happens. It comes true. Now, can you imagine really living like that? We've got some work to do, people. We've got some work to do. And know that when we talk about that, this corner's got it, but know that when we talk about that, what we're saying is that we live in the abundance of God, not from an ego point of mind, not I get what I want when I want it because I want it, not from that, but from the consciousness of God, of knowing that we are so blessed. We are so blessed. And just like you heard in the Heartbeat with Alyssa Guerrero talking about that, saying that the first key is gratitude, so it is in abundance. That when we live in abundance, we appreciate how we're already so incredibly blessed. And out of our blessing, we open up to even greater prosperity in God. Don't you love really knowing that? And can't you imagine knowing that in every aspect of your life? Yes, clearly, every aspect. You know, I was really thinking about this, and I was defining prosperity as living abundantly from a consciousness of God everywhere, all the time. Prosperity is living in, breathing, exuding a consciousness of God. And feeling and knowing the abundance of God everywhere, all the time. That is how we are called to live. And it's a great thing when you realize that there is always room to grow and there is always room to experience more of the fulfillment of God. And so when we think about this, I invite you to take in these words from Eric Butterworth. He tells us that the first step in prosperity thinking is to raise your consciousness enough to know that wherever you are standing, you are standing on holy ground. And what that means is that the whole Spirit of God is standing with you. And when God is standing with you, you are living in the abundance of God. For you are the heir to the kingdom. You are God's beloved. So do this with me. Stand up and take a look at your feet. Wow. And know that as you look at your feet, know that you are standing on holy ground. You don't have to go to a sacred water. You don't have to go to the mountain. You don't have to go even into a meditation space in your room. You, right where you stand, are standing on holy ground because the whole presence of God is present where you are. Can you feel that power? You see how that is very different than if 3 minutes ago I would have said, please stand. Know this power as the truth. Now I have a trick for you. Take a step. Guess where you're standing? On holy ground. Take a step back. Where are you standing? Come on. Wonderful. You may be seated. And so I really want you to get that wherever you are, from the presence of God within you, you can call forward the whole presence of God. As we say in unity and as we know our second principle, we know that God lives within us. And wherever we are, God is. as the beloved of God, each of us is called to know God more. And I would tell you that if God had a wish, if God were a person and had a wish, it would be that we all would know the beauty from which we are created, and that we would all gladly give and receive the fulfillment and the abundance of blessings that are truly ours. Each of us is called to live in the fulfillment of prosperity. There is nothing sacred or holy about being poor. There is nothing sacred or holy about living in lack and being afraid of more lack. There is nothing sacred or holy about feeling guilty about good or wanting to have greater good in your life. Each of us is the beloved of God, and we are called to live in God's abundance in every way. You know, I remember one of the first times that I heard that and really took it in. And it was probably one of the most healing things I'd ever heard. Because I felt in that moment, I was in meditation, I felt like all of these old selves were melting away from me. All these old ideas and all these old beliefs about what prosperity was and about what prosperity wasn't. And I felt like one of those layers were my thoughts and ideas about being unworthy. For in the old way, I would look out and I would see people that prospered in whatever way it was, whether it was in love or friendship or in success in work or maybe in financial wealth or health, whatever it was. And I always did this human thing of comparing myself to that person. And I always ended up on the short end of that stick. And when I wasn't on the short end, I felt guilty for feeling glad about myself because I knew there were others that had less than I did. So when I realized that we are all called to live in unending blessing, and when I realized in that moment that we are all called to have fulfillment in all the ways that our heart can dream of, there was a release that happened, and there was an opening that lifted me up to a new way. And I knew without a doubt that I was indeed God's beloved, and that indeed it is God's great pleasure to give me the kingdom of goodness. And that is the same for each and every one of us. All of us are deserving of the kingdom of good if we only understood it. If we only opened our hearts in faith with a willingness to say, yes, I will receive God's good. Well, in opening to that thought, I want to share with you what our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, says about prosperity in his book titled Prosperity. He says we're now in the dawn of a new era, that the old methods of supply and support are fast passing away, and new methods are waiting to be brought forth. In the coming commerce, man will not be a slave to money, for the spiritual substance from which comes all visible wealth is never depleted. It is right with you all the time, and it responds to your faith, and it responds to your demands upon it. This unfailing resource of substance is always ready to give. It has no choice. It is its nature. today I wanted to share with you about really believing that we live in substance, because all things begin in thought. And when we hold thoughts of knowing that we live in an abundant universe, and that the abundance of the universe is always conspiring for our good, should we hold the thought that allows it, then what happens is we experience abundance everywhere we are. If we begin to pay attention to our thoughts and notice if they're prosperous. Are they loving, grateful thoughts? Are they thoughts that are affirming and spiritual, that see and know our highest good? Are they thoughts of God? Or are they thoughts of lack, fear, and old ideas that do not serve us? We always have a great choice, and one of the things that I learned about that choice was to create long ago an affirmation that helped me to live in abundance. And so I used a denial and an affirmation. And if you remember, a denial is a statement of truth that no longer gives power to an old belief or an old idea. And an affirmation is a statement of truth that affirms God's presence and good in an empowering way. And so this was my denial and affirmation for a very long time, and it continues to do its good for me. I always say this. I always say, I cannot afford a lack thought. You get it? I cannot afford to have a lack thought. For God's good is waiting for me. When I notice that I'm having lack thoughts, that not enough time, not enough this, not enough that, or when I have fear because the thing that I've held in my heart hasn't manifested in my time, and then I start to doubt. And then I start to speculate and worry that God really isn't present, and maybe that isn't the truth anyway. So when I have those thoughts, I realize it is costing me in my consciousness. Those are not prosperous thoughts. They're not loving thoughts. They do not serve. I cannot afford, if I am to grow and live in God, I cannot afford a lack thought. It costs too much. Instead, I choose to live knowing that God is my source of all good, always. So I put this into action just this morning, and I didn't even realize it. I was getting dressed this morning. I wasn't feeling my best, and so I was putting some things together, and I put on this outfit, just like that. And I thought, it needs something, and I don't know what, but I can't think about it. It needs something. And so anyway, I didn't give it another thought, and then in between services, look what I found on my desk. A scarf that matches perfectly. Thank you, Carla. And the thought was just she said, a free gift. A free gift with love. And so I manifested from that thought, not saying I don't have something. All I said was, I need something. I don't know what it is. God answered through Carla and gave me this lovely scarf. Well, when we live in a consciousness of God, what happens is those kinds of things happen more and more often all the time. Sometimes we are the generator, we are the channel through which the gift happens, and sometimes we are the recipient. But there is a cycle, we call it the law of circulation, of giving and receiving, giving and receiving, giving and receiving. And as we continue to hold that God is good, God's abundance is all the time, we easily give more and we easily receive more. And we keep that law, that spiritual law, in action. And so I love holding that, and what Marianne Williamson calls that is she calls it really a miracle. In her wonderful book, The Law of Divine Compensation, she talks about miracle thinking, and she relates to A Course in Miracles. But she explains that miracle thinking is when we shift our consciousness from human limited thoughts into thoughts of God, thoughts of love that serve us and serve and honor the presence of God. I wanted to share something about that with you that she says right in the very beginning. She says in the beginning that our thoughts create, and that we either hold thoughts of love or we hold thoughts of fear, and that we can always make the choice. But when we hold thoughts of love, we open up to the power of love because it is our essence. And from that love, we draw to us not only the purpose to love others, but the ability to live in God's love even more fully. You are loved, and your purpose is to love. And from your mind, filled with infinite love, comes the power to create infinite possibilities. All of us have the power to think in ways that reflect and attract all the love in the world. Such thinking is called enlightenment. Enlightenment is a process, or is not a process we work toward, but it is a choice available to us in every moment. So think about that for yourself. Is there a lack thought or a lack idea that you hold to be your relative truth? Is there an idea about yourself or about a circumstance or a situation that is not a loving thought? It is not generated from God. And as you hold that thought in your mind, what do you notice happens with that thought? You'll notice that you feel kind of heavy and you feel kind of blah and you feel maybe disheartened or disappointed. But Marianne Williamson says this. She says, to whatever extent that your mind is aligned with love, you will receive divine compensation for any lack in your material existence. So the more that you align with the power of love, the more you naturally attract God's good. And God's good will even fill those spaces that have room for greater abundance. Those are really powerful words. We put this law of divine compensation into action by continuing to monitor our thoughts and by continuing to hold the highest and the most loving thoughts that we can. Our thoughts always attract more good. And so when we hold thoughts that are loving and affirming of God's goodness and abundance, we can't help but attract that good. We can't help but live in abundance if we have the awareness and the willingness to see it. Think about this. Think about how this is true in your life. If you can, think about a situation where you can ask yourself, what is it that I believe? What is it do I hold as abundance in a situation that by all appearances does not look like prosperity? And can I move my thinking into faith in knowing that God exists and that God's presence as abundance exists in that moment where I stand on holy ground? And if I have faith beyond the appearance of what I see, but if I have faith that God is present as abundance and that abundance is forthcoming, then I see beyond the appearance. And my faith is no longer in lack, but my faith is in God. Do you see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? It's a really important thing to really understand. In her book, Marianne talks about how you may be in a financial situation where you have bills piling up and there's all sorts of challenges in front of you. And how on earth do you not have faith in lack in those moments? And she calls us up and she says, know that this is your experience, but it is not the truth. God's abundance, God's prosperity is the truth. And the more that I hold that truth, the more I draw that energy to me as a magnet. Not as wishful thinking, not as denial and pretending the circumstance before me is not at hand. But I go deeper into knowing, despite this appearance, God's abundance is the truth, and I call it forth. One of my favorite examples of this was, and I've spoken of it several times, but one of my very favorite is a time when I needed to leave my private practice. It was a pretty emergent situation, and I needed to get out of that situation in a hurry, and I had no idea what to do or where to go. And it came to me that an old friend of mine had once said to me, if you ever want to, Myra, I would always love for you to work with me. And those words came back to me as an idea. And so I kind of humbled myself a little bit, and I made a phone call to my old friend who hadn't heard from me in about 3 or 4 years. And I called him and I said, you know, I'm in a tough situation in my workplace, and I need to leave this situation in a hurry. And I remember that you always said that if I ever wanted to, the door would always be open for me to work with you. And I heard this breath. It was just a... And my dear friend, Dr. Shaw, said to me, Myra, whatever you need, I will have an office for you in 2 days. Whatever you need. And he did. He did. Dr. Shaw was the chairman of the psychiatry department in the multi-specialty clinic from which I then began work. I never went through human resources. I never went before anybody else. He just made it happen. Now what he did was he cut a large office in half and had them put up a wall, and so the person whose office it was wasn't real thrilled with me for about 3-4 months. But he made it happen out of love. And he asked no questions. He just said, just come. My willingness to believe in God's abundance, my faith that good could happen, brought forward that idea to call Dr. Shaw. And my willingness to actually make the call and speak the words opened the door to this experience of love. Dr. Shaw and I had worked together in a hospital on a psychiatric ward for about 6 years before that. But it was during our time working together that we became very, very close. And I considered him my surrogate dad. And so not only was I blessed with a place to work, but I was blessed with a deepened relationship with a man that I came to love very much. This is God's prosperity at work when we are open and willing to practice spiritual law. When we are open to the possibility of a good beyond our thinking. Because in my mind, I could have said, well, he hasn't talked to me for 3 years. I don't know how he's going to have space. I could have reviewed the names of other therapists and psychologists and said, they have no need for me. And I could have done this whole thing in my head to cancel out this experience so it would never have even been a possibility. But you see, God's work in us and through us is greater. And if we are open and receptive, and if I trust that God will find a way, the doors begin to open. And so this is what we're all called to do as we are going to live in prosperity. It's how we're meant to live. We're meant to open up to this great abundance of God through faith, by watching our thoughts, by paying attention, and then acting accordingly in faith and love. I think about the words of Jesus, our wonderful way shower. And I look to him as my great example, and I see that he acted in love in every way. We know of his tremendous love for God, that he dwelled in God. And we know so well the ways that he poured love out in his care and in his teaching again and again for all beings everywhere. Jesus said, I have come so that you may have life and have it abundantly. And this is what we are called to do. How did Jesus have life? He had life in and through God. And he poured that life out as love for all people without hesitation. And was he cared for? He was dearly cared for. He always had food. He wore the finest garments. He was well cared for. He was able to express his purpose. He was able to assist those to also know God and to live abundantly in that presence. Let us follow the teachings of our beloved brother. Let us listen and let us learn to live abundantly. And let us go forward in a mighty way as we open the door in faith to living beautifully, abundantly and freely in all ways. So I invite you to take a moment